So there are a couple of different ways I suggested of trying to work around this three-dimensional, two-dimensional representational problem. There are, at one extreme, what's called equal area maps, in which the priority is placed on accurately representing the relative size of different parts of the surface of the Earth. So in this case, the obvious example is the continents. You want to make sure that the relative size of the continents is accurately depicted, and in order to do that, you have to distort their shapes. You have to actually not depict them as they actually look if you were looking down from space. Conformal maps, on the other hand, go to the other extreme, and they depict shapes accurately, but distort area. So you've probably noticed, and maybe I've got one of these back here, is Greenland really that big relative to South America? No, Greenland is not actually anywhere nearly as large as South America. Here it would appear that it's maybe half or two-thirds the size of South America. Similarly, in actual reality, Africa is much larger than this relative to Greenland, relative to Canada. These are the kinds of problems, different ways to try to deal with them. Most maps in this atlas are actually at neither extreme. They are compromise maps in which sort of the two have been balanced against each other to try to arrive at some kind of workable representation. Any questions? A couple more slides and then we'll have a break. Cartographic or map scale. Scale being, in this case, the relationship between the distance on the map and the distance on the ground. Right? This is another thing to look for on any map, or at least any reference map, is to look for the scale. There ought to be one. There needs to be one. There needs to be some way to indicate how much actual distance is represented by a unit of distance on the map. So 1 to 62,500 is the scale at which 1 inch on your map represents 1 mile on the ground. Now, 2 points about this. First, the area shown decreases as scale increases, while the level of detail shown increases. Now, cartographers, notice this ratio, 1 to 62,500. So the first number in this ratio is 1 unit on the map. The second number is the unit on the ground. In other words, your inch on the map, which is 1, actually represents 62,500 inches on the ground. As a result, cartographers like to say that a large-scale map is one in which this ratio is a larger number. So if you had a 1 to 2 ratio, in which 1 inch on your map represented 2 inches in reality, that would be a bigger fraction than 1 to 62,500, right? This means that cartographers actually call large and small scale the opposite from what everyone else does. And they persist in this habit, and they think it's okay because they did it first. They've been doing this for 500 plus years. So they don't see any reason to flip these two numbers around, so that they could speak about large and small scale the way everyone else does. Every other day of the semester, when I say large scale, I'm going to mean the opposite of this, okay? A large scale map for me is one that depicts a bunch of area, right? All of the world, all of a continent, that kind of thing. Which, of course, for a cartographer would be a really small scale. It'd be like 1 to 2 million or something like that. But I promise you, only cartographers have this weird habit of talking about scale in the opposite way from everybody else. And my own feeling is they should just give in, flip these two numbers around, make the numerator the denominator, and then it would all make sense. And they would have a lot easier time communicating with everyone else. But they like to hold on to their conventions. Second thing, the smaller the scale, the greater the degree of generalization required to make the map. And here again, this is cartographer's small scale. In other words, if you were trying to depict an entire continent on a map, which is for them a small scale, you have to generalize more. You have to simplify more. This is perfectly straightforward and obvious, right? Just like with a car model. You make it, you change the scale, you change the amount of detail that you can incorporate into that model. You try to make a car that's only this big, it's going to be really tough to give it a carburetor, right? If you had a huge scale one, you could put a carburetor in there without any trouble. All right, let's take a 5-minute break. Okay. So, generalization. We've got a couple things we put out there so far. One is that maps are models. Another is that they necessarily distort reality to some degree, in some way or another. And that what I'm going to call larger scale maps require more generalization than what I call smaller scale maps. Okay? And again, I'm not going to talk like a cartographer, but you do need to remember that about cartographic scale. These are some of the kinds of generalization that cartographers use. And by the way, if you're interested, we have a cartographer in the department who teaches a class in cartography. You can learn how to make maps and how to do these things and think about how to do them well. Simplification, excluding information that is not important for the purposes of the map. Right? So you simplify the model car by not putting an engine in it. You just leave it out because maybe the model car that you're trying to make doesn't need to have an engine in it. Classification, defining different categories of a phenomenon, whether qualitatively or quantitatively. So in that map from the New York Times, for example, they decided to classify the immigrant portion of each county's population and to do it in two ways, right? One was, where did the largest minority group, foreign-born minority group in a county come from, which continent? So that's a qualitative way of classifying immigrant populations. And the other was quantitative. What percentage of that county's population did that group represent? Was it more like 2%, 4%, 6%? Those are two intersecting ways of classifying foreign-born populations in each county over time. A lot of work goes into assembling all that information, and even to depict it, you need to somehow make some classifications that are, in a sense, arbitrary, right? Why 2 and 4 and 6%, not 2.5 and 5 and 7.5, something like that, right? Those are decisions the map maker has to make. Symbolization, using color symbols, line widths, etc., to depict various things or relative values, right? So the dot for the capital city might have a little star in it. The dot for another city, a non-capital city, might not. These are ways of, again, depicting information, representing information visually. Interpolation or induction, inferring continuous spatial distributions from non-continuous data. Does that make sense what that would mean? Trying to, oh boy, what's a good example of that? Well, again, well, we go back to that New York Times map and think about it, couldn't we? In a sense, within each county, the tint, the hue of that color is a classificatory decision about percentages represented by that group within the county. But if you look at the relationship over space, the sort of fact that it's darker along the border and it fades off over as you get further away, suggesting a certain pattern, that's a sort of an example of interpolation in which your data points are each classified by county. But by comparing them over space, you can get a sense for some kind of continuous distribution, or in this case, gradient, of the relative size of a foreign-born population within a county. Does that make sense? I don't feel like I've got that very nicely explained. It's actually something we may not run into very much. It's just another part of the effort of making maps. All right, who makes maps and how? This is where we're going to get into some slightly more significant questions. These are just passages from the atlas. This atlas was created digitally by cartographers working on 2 continents, utilizing imagery captured by satellites, radar, and thousands of sensors scattered across the face of the Earth. Why it matters that it was made by cartographers working on 2 continents rather than 1, I'm not sure. They're obviously quite proud of this. I think it's safe to assume that the 2 continents in question were North America and Europe. But they don't say that for sure. The atlas editors relied upon proven data sources such as the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the World Wildlife Fund, Bureau of the Census, and the U.S. Department of Commerce. Again, evidently quite proud of their data sources, which we are told are proven. Although, I'm not sure. And they don't justify the notion that they're somehow more proven than other data sources might have been. But in any case, this is their attempt to demonstrate that they have done their homework and they are being rigorous and careful and reliable, and you can count on this information, right? And that makes a big difference. You see a map, like maybe some of the ones we looked at the beginning of class, and you'd be like, okay, fine. But who is this person making this map? What authority do they have to depict reality and claim that it's an accurate representation? That their model, Tex-Mex versus pineapple, has got some kind of real purchase on the reality in the world. In a sense, the authority of a map rests precisely on this question of who's making it, from what kinds of information sources, and for what purposes. And these are questions that have to be asked, and I want you to ask them whenever you see a map. The political maps in this atlas were created in a range of scales from global cartographic databases that merge data from maps National Geographic Society created in the past. These seamless databases give NGS the ability to map anywhere in the world at an appropriate scale. There's a great deal of very high technology and expensive technology built into the gathering of this information. As I say, sensors and so forth, satellites, remote sensing. There's a couple pages in the atlas about remote sensing and the amazing things that can be done with imagery gathered from satellites. And this notion that they have somehow managed to create a multi-scalar or trans-scalar database to work with is quite significant and important as an innovation in cartography. And it's something that is associated, and it's sometimes exaggerated, the powers of GIS. Everyone know what GIS is? Geographical Information Systems. It's digital spatial analysis to essentially transcend this problem of scale. As we've seen, your scale determines simplification and generalization. The scale determines how much information you can get into a map. But if you can create a database that sort of allows you to change the scale, expand it and contract it, and have more stuff come out as you get to a smaller scale, and have it recede into the background as you go to larger scales, doing that is an amazing power achieved through GIS and technologies linked to remote sensing and so on and so forth. But let's not forget that that's not just power in the sense of computing power. This is actually more complicated than that. And now this is where I want to talk about territory and territoriality, and then come back at the end to maps. These are the key terms from this first chapter from Delaney. These are the concepts that I want you to take from this reading and to think about as we move forward into the rest of the semester. Territory and territorialization, meaning and power, modernity, sovereignty and property, textuality and interpretability, verticality. This may all sound kind of abstract and difficult, but these are actually basic concepts that we're going to work with through the semester, and you should try to make sure you understand them and start digesting them and using them. Territory and territoriality. The basics of territory are fairly straightforward. A space, a line, some meaning, some state of affairs. A territory is a bounded, meaningful space. Anybody have any questions about what that might mean? Examples. As he's defining it, territory can be applied to or can be found in almost any situation any place, at almost any scale. We can think of it, it's a very flexible concept. It can be used, you could literally start thinking about how to map, say, your refrigerator, the inside of your refrigerator. Different parts of the refrigerator are used for different kinds of food. And those different kinds of food somehow symbolize both the way we organize food conceptually in our heads and also the way we do it materially in the world, and also perhaps the way the refrigerator itself has got certain capacities and so forth built into it. And there are meanings there. It seems banal. It is banal. But that's the kind of range we could think about extending this outwards from or using these concepts for. Territoriality refers more to the relationship between territories and some other social phenomena. Everyone's done this reading, right? Are you here with a light bulb? Awesome. Everyone did the reading, right? Makes sense? You understand the concepts here? What's going on? Good. Territories are fundamentally constitutive of the social orders whose features they express. Territoriality is a social and political, economic, cultural process that unfolds not only in place but through time. Let's start with this first one. Fundamentally constitutive of the social orders whose features they express. What does that mean? Yeah.
They represent what lives within them. They project what the people, and they represent the people that live within the territory.
They represent the people who live within them. They represent it in what sense?
It's just that when looking into the territory from another territory, you think you associate it with whatever is inside of that territory.
Okay. I think you're onto it. I'm trying to make constitutive of. What does that mean? It's not just that territory reflects or represents the social relations in a given place. Territory is constitutive of them, yeah. Okay, the territory, thinking about territory, this relationship between space and meaning and power, these are not contingent or accidental features of a social reality that you're making sense of. They actually contribute to making it what it is. Now, that may sound circular, but think about it in terms of, again, perhaps your everyday life. And these are some examples that Delaney uses himself, right? Think about the difference between your private space and public space. Space where you feel like you are entitled to be left alone or exclude other people, versus space where you know you don't really have that kind of claim or right or power, right? So your bedroom or your apartment or your house is territory of a different kind from the street in downtown Berkeley. Now, again, that may sound banal, but the point here is that, in fact, the social relations that are reflected in those differences, right? The relationship between public and private, the fact that in your private space you have a right in our society to close the door, lock it, and tell anybody who comes along that they can't come in, right? And that's part of what makes that private space private. It's part of what makes it into what it is. Does that make sense? Which is to say that if you look at a given situation, you go and study some society or wherever it may be, and you look at the way territory is configured, the kinds of territory that obtain in that situation, you are not only seeing something that reflects the social relations of that society, you are also seeing something that contributes to producing the social relations as they are. Now, again, that may seem like a complicated, convoluted idea, or circular perhaps, but it is in fact the starting point from which a great deal of human geography departs. And it's basically a simple statement. It's look at space and the way space is organized and used, and you will understand something about the society itself. And the society you're looking at, in part, is created through those spatial, territorial practices and structures. Any questions? Or is that all just perfectly obvious? I hope it is perfectly obvious, but I hope it also I hope it opens up a way of thinking about things that may be either unfamiliar to you or perhaps even just taken for granted. And you start thinking about the ways in which space and territory are produced all around us at all sorts of different scales in ways that really do contribute to making your life and our lives what they are, okay? Second claim here, social, political, economic, cultural process that unfolds not only in place but through time. This is simply to say that those territorial relations between public and private, for example, are not simply naturally given. They are produced over time, and therefore they have histories. And you read Delaney, and he talks about Supreme Court decisions regarding what police can do to gather evidence of a crime, whether they can trespass onto private